Welcome back to ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell, and this is Global Connections. And today we're going to talk with Dr. Roopmati Khandekar about weapons for Ukraine, because there's a lot of news about it, and the news is not necessarily encouraging. Welcome to the show, Roopmati.
Aloha, Jay. Thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
The same. So, we start with the question of political will, because you can't support somebody who's being attacked if you don't have political will. Now, there's all these discussions, about will the EU give support and weapons to Ukraine and Zelensky? Will NATO do that? Will the United States do that? Will countries in Asia do that? Like Korea, for example, which receives billions of dollars of support from us in terms of military hardware. So, the question I put to you is there sufficient political will to provide the weapons that Zelensky needs?
Jay, now the Ukraine-Russia crisis has been normalized, regularized in our news. And we see it being a feature in all our newspapers and all our news bits everywhere. But you don't see concrete action because there is really, like you said, a lack of political will. Now we have the United States being the largest contributor with around close to 47 billion. Then we have the European Union, which is 30 billion. And then you have right back where you have Germany and the United States contributing 5 billion, 8 billion. And rest, we don't have nothing from Asia coming for Ukraine. So you have Ukraine fighting a superpower. Now, Russia is huge in terms of geography, political, military, economic, every which way than Ukraine. So to fight or even put up a resistance against a global superpower requires a concerted effort. And that is not happening, Jay. When we see lack of any political negotiations which are concrete and which are targeting Russia in such a way, the economic sanctions were a sham. If we go to see, they called it the bread basket, Ukraine and Russia being the bread basket. So let's take the UN sponsored, take the bread out. Then you have Russia selling oil to India, India selling refined oil to Europe. So everything is moving on except for the what do you say, superficial farce of economic sanctions. There is business as usual underneath the carpet. So this kind of an action, rather inaction against Russia, is not going to help any consequence of the Ukraine-Russia war.
Now, one of the interesting metrics, which was covered in a recent article in the New York Times, is global companies and multinational companies doing business in Russia. And there are hundreds of them, Western companies that are doing business in Russia even now. They have not pulled out. They have not stopped operating. They have not stopped making money. They have not closed their doors. And Russia has made it hard for them to do that, and they have succumbed to the Russian strategies. Result is they're still there, still doing business. And they don't want to lose the money. And they see that this would be a loss to them. So the money is more important, than the war. It's more important than Ukraine. It's more important than the liberal world order, and they're still doing business. I find it remarkable. And in fact, I think that we all ought to have a list of these companies and swear never to do business with them again here. But that's not the subject of our show. I only mention it because what it shows is a lack of political will among the multinationals also. And then, of course, you've got a lack of political will in Congress. They can't get anything done. And now there's a growing segment of the conservative end of the House that really doesn't care much about Ukraine. For that matter, they don't care much about the military, American military. Bottom line is it's going to be harder in the future as we go forward to get money, to get weapons from Congress to go to Ukraine. And then, of course, Donald Trump, if he wins the election in 2024, he's not going to support Zelensky. He never did. He's going to support Vladimir Putin. That'd be the end of that. So I'm very worried about it. But let's drill down and let's unpack the weapons themselves. Okay, one of the interesting issues that's been covered in the paper lately is the mines. While we were having a confab over whether to send cluster bombs, the fact is the Russians were already using cluster bombs. And
Right.
while we were arguing about the moral points of cluster bombs, they were mining all of eastern Ukraine with hundreds, thousands of mines that are very hard to find and destroy. And then they developed a strategy, probably with Prigozhin's help, of trying to kill anybody or any fighting vehicle or any minesweep vehicle that tries to take out the mines. And when the sappers take out the mines, they mine it again using aerial deployment of mines. Bottom line is the whole area is mined. It's going to be mined for decades and decades. We worry about the effect of cluster bombs, but in fact, the place is already a killing field.
Right, Jay. Now the cluster ammunition, which was supposed to take out a large area instead of targeted weapons, everything came into the limelight when the US decided to send cluster bombs before a few hours to Ukraine. Like you said, when Russia is using it, nobody's paying attention to it. So this suddenly the convention of against cluster ammunition signed by 106 countries, all these things come up in the media as play only after the US decides to send this for Ukraine. So you see why they don't highlight that or stop something to stop. Did anybody stop Russia from using cluster bombs? Now Russia is talking that if you send the cluster bombs, they will use the counter cluster bombs. They have not said this publicly that they have used the cluster bombs before. Now, the cluster bombs, like everybody, like maybe they have bomblets, which are dropped from the main ammunition. So these droplets stay as mines because of the dud rate. Now, the dud rate for Russian cluster bombs is around 40%, J. That means 40% of it stays as mine. For the American system, the dud rate is 20%. So you see, which is more dangerous for the future, the Russian ones. So the counter which will happen from Russia, their freedom to use cluster bombs as a retaliatory action because America is sending to Ukraine is a cloak to hide their offensive, which is not really endorsed by normal means of war. They are very aggressive. And to stop them, Jay, we have, take the example of Leopard 2 tanks. Now, America sent around 31 Abrams tanks, but Leopard tanks were sent by Germany, and they decided to send them. But when Chancellor Schloss came to power, he said that Germany does not want to become the main aggressor like they did in the first two world wars. So he is now hesitant to send the Leopard 2 tanks. And because there is a rule in international ammunition or war theory that when they export any of their tanks and to a country and the country decides to resend it, they have to take permission from the main exporter. So now Germany exported it to Spain. Spain wants to send it to Ukraine, but Spain is waiting for legal access from Germany, which is not being given. So this delay is causing Ukraine loss of lives. So this re-export, clause in international theory, they are that is hampering the progress of the Ukrainian soldiers. And you see, like you said, Jay, they come inside, they mine the field, and they go back. So what Ukraine thinks it's reclaiming minefields, they will be in forever, isn't it, Jay?
You know, one thing about the Leopard tanks or any tanks is that a lot of these mines are anti-tank mines. And
Yes.
The Ukrainians have precious few tanks, especially these recent models. And so they lost a couple of tanks because of the anti-tank mines. And then they said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to have to send individual sappers, they call them, into the minefields to sweep the mines before we send the tanks in. This is much more dangerous than before. And they are holding back on using the tanks, the few tanks that they have. You can imagine what this does to their counteroffensive. You can imagine what it does to their individual soldiers. They have to go and risk their lives for every one of these mines because they can't send the very few tanks they have. Furthermore, there are minesweep type tanks that are capable of blowing up mines. The problem with that is that the Russian strategy, probably devised by Prigozhin, is to see and destroy these minesweep tanks, and they focus on them first. They're big and they're noisy, and it's easy to shoot them up. So the result is the Russians are shooting up all the minesweep tanks, and there's nobody left but the sappers crawling on their bellies to try to, pull those mines out. This is not working well.
No, not at all. Not at all. The Striker and the Bradley, which was given to Ukraine, were outdated tanks. And this, like you said, the minesweeping vehicles being targeted is the Russian prowess in war. It's 100% going to be higher than what Ukraine has. So, Jay, when we talk about this, we have to understand that Russian army, the tank system of Russia is Ukrainian tank system is no match for Russia. So, unless there is a large scale upheaval or progress of the Ukrainian tanks, they are not going to make any concrete progress.
Very interesting to note that Russia has been, doing its own military development over the past several years. I mean, and they've been involved in a lot of wars, right? And they've taken territory illegally, and they've used their navy and their army and their tanks and their artillery and these missiles in other locations. So they've been manufacturing. You can say that Russia is a poor country, but they've been devoting an awful lot of money to developing weapons. On the other hand, NATO and its members, have not been developing weapons, not been stockpiling artillery. The U.S. does not have enough weapons to give them, which I find, really hard to believe, given the fact that we spend more money on military hardware than any place in the world, any other country by far. But we don't have enough weapons to give them, enough ammunition to give them, enough tanks. But let's go to fighter jets. Let's go to the F-16s. What would you say about that? Because we still have not delivered any F-16s.
Jay, Ukraine kept on asking for fighter jets. Till in May this year, Joe Biden announced that he will give F-16 and train their pilots. But this move was welcomed by other nations because UK, Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Denmark got a chance to re-export their imported F-16s to Ukraine. But nothing has been done as of yet. Now, take, for example, the Patriot system, Jay, which is given by the US. It is a problem because, or it is discussed in the Congress because each Patriot missile costs $3 million. So now that is a lot of money for the American taxpayer to pay because right now we are fighting recession here. So to show that kind of money which is going to be sent to Ukraine in a single Patriot missile costing $3 million is not a sellable point for the American public. But instead of stockpiling this, it can help this long-range artillery can help Ukraine in such a big way. The UK contributes with Starstreak and the German Iris-T. But Jay, these are bits and pieces which are being given. There is nothing concrete being given or no. See, the borders are haphazardly being attacked and restored, haphazardly attacked and restored. There is a planned strategic attack which is coming from Russia, but there is no planned counteroffensive coming from Ukraine. So you have just sites of resistance. There is no wall of resistance. So that is making a big difference in this war, Jay, because they are fighting a strategic superpower which exactly knows that they want to win. And you have Zelensky, who is going from doorstep to doorstep, asking for weapons, but he is not getting what he wants because everybody's got their own considerations to have. Like I said, Germany is thinking that they don't want to be shown as the aggressor. But you are right at the doorstep of this conflict. If you don't help it tomorrow, they will be at your doorstep. So this will not it's not going to help Germany portray a good picture, because now you see there was a survey in Germany which showed that 40% sided with Russia. So that was so shocking. I mean, Europe warming up to Russian aggression on Ukraine is not a good sign, because it's going to come to Europe very soon.
When the political compass moves over toward Putin, they are less likely to put the money or the weapons in. And so, at best, Zelensky has been getting hand-me-down, second-class weapons, different kinds of weapons that require different kinds of ammunition, different kinds of training, different kinds of logistics all around. So that's at best. But if you look for a combined effort, a strong response among the countries of NATO or the EU or the United States, you don't see that. It's always reluctance. It's always, we're so worried that he will use, he'll blow up another dam like Kakhovka. He'll somehow create an accident in Zaporizhia, or he'll just blow up some nuclear bombs. Everybody is so worried. They, as a result, they don't go whole hog on providing Zelensky with what he is asking for. And as time goes on, you can see that Zelensky is really losing patience, because they promise, the United States promised F-16s a long time ago. At first they said no, then they said yes. Then they say we have to wait and train the pilots, and then they didn't train the pilots, and now the result is no F-16s.
Yes.
Bottom line is he must be getting really frustrated, because all it is rhetoric, propaganda, and empty promises. He's not being funded properly. He's not getting the weapons. So there are some weapons that are getting over there. I forget, I think it was Mark Hamill, who's a Hollywood star, was trying to raise money to send drones over there. But that's intelligence. That's not weapons. Thank you very much. And I want to mention one thing for your consideration. In the United States, we have a population of 330 million people, okay? And we have guns of 400 million people. In fact, there are more guns than there are people. And that means that some people have no guns at all. Some people have multiple guns in their closets. Some people have 2 or 3 times the guns, that there are a number of people in their household. Some people have guns that are military grade weapons, that you'd never in the world use in common everyday life. They have these guns, they're powerful guns, they're automatic guns. If just a fraction of all these people with all these guns would give these guns to the Ukrainians with all the ammunition they have in their closets, the Ukrainians would be so far better off. But you never hear about that, do you?
No, not at all. Jay, it's like so simple yet so complicated, isn't it? Now, like you mentioned about the drones, which are used in targeting and surveillance and heavy lift operations, they're just for surveillance, but they are being portrayed as part of the ammunition. And Turkey, which is selling the Bakhtiar drones to Ukraine, they are doing it as a business. I mean, there is a company which is selling drones to crowdfunding. Now, imagine crowdfunding happening for Ukraine and they're buying drones. So, and this concept of training the fighter pilots, Jay, the delay that is caused because they're giving the weapons, but they're going to train the people to take the tanks, to take the jets, or any help. They need to train them because no NATO citizen can enter Ukraine. If they enter, they will the pilots of NATO countries. If they enter with their jets, it will be a direct call of again NATO versus Warsaw. So they're trending a very thin line. They have to have Ukrainian soldiers who will fight with given weapons. They cannot have, it should have been immediately, I feel, it should have been the need of the hour to all the allies come together, not the allies, the powers who are against Russia come together and form a counteroffensive and block Russia. This NATO, Warsaw, allies, world wars, all these considerations have pushed the entire country into the graveyard. I mean, it is as simple as that.
Yeah, and recently in Vilnius, although there was some possibility that NATO would say, yes, we'll take Ukraine as a member and give them a timeline, that would be very meaningful strategically. Yes. They didn't give them a timeline, and that's another point of frustration for Zelensky. But here, we have a few minutes left. I want to ask you this question. So, no F-16s, no counter mine equipment, not sufficient quantities of ammunition. And I could go on. We're so reluctant to give them what they are asking for over a year and a half. And aside from the morale question for Zelensky and his troops, they're stuck in the Donbass. They're in trench warfare, and what the Russians are doing, as I understand it, they're dropping mines into the trenches, making it all the more dangerous. So how does this lack of weapons and ammunition and military technology, if you will, we know that it's essentially stopped the Ukrainian counteroffensive, but what's the long-term effect of this kind of reluctance to provide Ukraine with the military support they have been asking for?
Jay, history will never forgive humanity again, like it was, they have just let this reluctance and this lack of political will and lack of strengthening the Ukrainians against the Russians, because this has framed a conflict which is 100% going to have repercussions in the longer run, that the aggression of Russia will not stop. Post Vladimir also, they will have aggression and expansionist policy, which will continue because we have seen that nothing happens in the international system when a conflict like this happens. Nothing touched Russia. That's the truth. Nothing, no amount of weapons given have, 1.5 years has seen no progress or no resistance from Ukraine. And if Russia wanted to trample Ukraine, they could have. You have to say that the delay is from the Russian side. If we talk about it very emphatically, that Russia has resisted its total annihilation of Ukraine. Otherwise, if they wanted, they could have, because nothing is stopping.
If I made you a leader of NATO or the or the EU or the prime minister or president of any of those countries, what would you do at this point What would you do here in the spring of 2023 to try to turn the tide on this?
Make Ukraine a member of the NATO and say you're fighting the NATO. That is the first priority, or which is being put into discussions and tables. And you have such a ugly delay about it, because if you make Ukraine a member of the NATO, Russia has to fight the entire NATO. That puts up a little resistance. But this Ukraine still fighting against Russia, and we helping you with bits and bits, it's not going to help. So making Ukraine a member of NATO, which is again, Jay, a far-fetched possibility, because EU does not want to get into controversy. They are facing recessions because of their power supply is important. Their electricity bills are more important. Lives are not that expensive. Lives are easy to get.
Well, I remember it was clear that Putin saw this as a war of waiting the other guy out, and that time worked in his favor.
Right.
I think that was true. And, it's not so much that Ukraine is weakened over time, although that is happening for the lack of support. It's that other things happen. I mean, for example, France is all tied up in racism issues and protests and concerns about the retirement age, where millions of people go out in the street and burn cars and shops and turn the society over. And he's saying, well, I like to see divisiveness in the countries that might get together, and time allows for divisiveness. Time allows for distraction. It's the same thing in this country, but I think in Europe there are many things that are attracting public attention away from the need to deal with the liberal world order. And that will probably, do you agree, that'll probably continue to happen, might get worse.
True, Jay. The world wars are fought in Europe. That is a reality. They don't have much of peace mentally. They prefer the wars over, America would have never entered the war if it was not for Pearl Harbor. These people have expansionist, petty, I have to say that they have petty political issues which lead to huge wars and which have repercussions for the future and globally. Now you see this war, Ukraine-Russia conflict, has caused economic repercussions, political repercussions, and on elections is going to reflect left and right in every country. Now France is facing the immigration problem. France is facing this backlash because they have allowed immigration to come in. There's religious undertones in this conflict. All that adds up to Europe's diversity and lack of action. You see, Jay, immigration was not such a big problem until a few years back. But now the entire population prefers not to go for war and just look for themselves. So what is happening in Ukraine has to happen only in Ukraine. It doesn't affect them. Despite their proximity to Ukraine, they are not bothering to have that kind of intensity in their reaction, because they feel it is Ukraine's problem, not theirs. But Europe is such a compact area. They fail to understand that it is going to impact them. If Ukraine is overtaken, now, like you said, Ukraine is going to be left like cheddar cheese, just what is that? Scattering of mines and nothing left for the future. But Russia will look forward to reclaiming areas of Norway, Finland. You never know. Once an expansionist, always an expansionist.
Yes, I totally agree. And remember, too, that there was supposedly an agreement last week by which grain would be permitted to pass through the Black Sea. And Putin killed that a couple of days later. So we have a world effect on food. Every day it's clear that he's a monster, and you never will be able to negotiate with him. But let me make you president of the United States for a moment. I've always wanted to do that. So as president of the United States, Roopmati, what would you do to address this problem we've been discussing?
And everything that Zelensky is asking for, he's not asking for much. He's asking for simple stuff which we can provide and give him at least a possible counterattack to Russia. I mean, it is just not right that he is fighting this all alone because, like you said, the leadership is lacking the teeth to get into this conflict.
Mm. Suppose he doesn't really come through. Suppose he is reluctant to supply them. It's on him, and he's running for president. What does that leave him, say, in a battle against a Republican candidate such as Trump? How will it affect Biden's chances in November? And I might add that the way he handled the Afghanistan departure really hurt him, and will hurt him again in November, this 2024. But if he loses Ukraine, if the Russians prevail there, what happens to Biden's prospects?
Jay, Ukraine, I think, will drag on for a little longer than the elections. But Biden presenting himself as inactive or the inaction that he's taken in the Ukraine conflict gives Trump all the more chance to present himself as a savior of everything, savior of your job, savior of, he's invoking history to portray himself as, like we discussed a few minutes back, as a leader of historical proportions. He's fighting a civil war. He's bringing all these notions which are which are not connected to the Ukraine. His agenda doesn't feature Ukraine. He is portraying himself as the leader in whose tenure there were no wars. So that kind of appeal that he's giving is for American citizens to feel that their children, their sons will not have to go to war. So that is such a big hint that he's giving that we will never have to. Now, what Biden did by pulling troops out of Afghanistan was the same thing. He brought the children back home. But that is being portrayed as, abandonment of Afghanistan and everything like that. So same thing, but different portrayals, isn't it?
It's all about propaganda.
Yes, and media is playing a big, big role in this.
Dr. Roopmati Khandekar, thank you so much for joining us on Global Connections. This has been a very interesting discussion. I look forward to more with you soon. Aloha.
Always. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please click the like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check out our website, thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.